Large sums of money do not come to you because you worked hard enough. They do not come because you finally suffered long enough, or because the universe decided you had earned your turn. They come because they are yours by divine right. And the moment you understand what that phrase actually means, at its root, at its legal and spiritual foundation, nothing about your financial life will ever look the same again. That is not a motivational statement. That is a law. And like every law, it operates whether you know it exists or not, whether you believe in it or not, whether you feel ready for it or not. Florence Scovel Shinn spent decades documenting what happens when ordinary people, people with debt, people with fear, people with no visible reason for hope, suddenly stop asking for money and start claiming it. The results were not gradual. They were not small. They were large sums arriving from directions no one had calculated, in amounts no one had dared to name out loud. Before anything else is said, understand the architecture of what you are about to receive. There is something hidden inside the concept of divine right that most teachers skip entirely, a single invisible element that determines whether prosperity consciousness produces real results or just produces a more comfortable relationship with lack. That element will be named clearly in this video, and when it lands, you will recognize it immediately because you will realize it has been the missing variable in every attempt you have made before. Everything in what follows is building toward that moment. Stay with it completely. A woman named Darlene, 43 years old, living outside of Columbus, Ohio, had been doing affirmations every morning for 2 years. She had vision boards. She had a gratitude journal that was nearly full. She believed in abundance, or she thought she did. On a Tuesday in late October at 7:19 in the morning, she was sitting at her kitchen table drinking coffee when her phone buzzed. It was a notification from her bank. The message said a deposit of $9,147 had been credited to her account. She checked the sender. It was a company she had done freelance design work for 4 years earlier, a company she had completely forgotten about, notifying her of a royalty settlement from work she had contributed to a product line that had far exceeded projections. She had signed a contract she barely remembered signing. The money had been sitting in a legal holding account for over a year, waiting for her to be located. Darlene did not change her affirmations the morning that happened. She did not do anything differently than the 900 mornings before it. What changed was something quieter, something she had shifted 2 weeks earlier that had nothing to do with trying harder and everything to do with finally understanding what divine right actually means in the law that Florence Scovel Shinn laid out in plain language over a century ago. Florence Scovel Shinn was not a self-help author in the modern sense of that phrase. She was a woman who had walked through financial devastation herself. She had built a career as a professional illustrator and artist in New York, had gone through a major life transition in 1912, and came out the other side with something rare. A working, tested, documented understanding of why some people receive large sums, and others, equally faithful and equally hard-working, do not. She published her foundational work, The Game of Life and How to Play It, in 1925, financing it herself because no publisher believed the ideas were commercially viable. Within years, it had spread across the country through word of mouth alone, copied by hand by people who could not afford to buy the next copy. The reason it spread is the same reason you are here right now, because what she discovered works, and it works in ways that are specific, repeatable, and available to anyone willing to receive what is already coded in their spiritual inheritance. Think of it this way. Your financial reality right now is like a smartphone running an operating system from a decade ago. The apps you need, the connections, the opportunities, the channels through which large sums move, they are all available. The network is there, the infrastructure exists, but the operating system cannot run them, not because you are not intelligent, not because you are not deserving, but because the core code has never been updated. Florence Scovel Shinn understood that the spoken word is the update mechanism. The decree is the command that rewrites the underlying code. And divine right is not a feeling. It is the original program, the factory setting, the version you were running before the world installed something else on top of it. What makes this particular law so important when it comes to large sums, not small sums, not trickles, not occasional surprises, but genuinely significant financial arrivals, is that large sums require a specific kind of internal authorization. A small amount can slip through an old system. A large amount cannot. The field does not deliver a volume of wealth to someone whose internal code is still running a poverty operating system, no matter how sincerely that person speaks their affirmations. This is the reason people who know about manifestation, who practice daily, who are spiritually committed, still find themselves receiving at a fraction of what they are calling in. It is not a question of faith. It is a question of authorization at the identity level. That is exactly what this is about. And that is exactly what shifts today. Write in the comments right now the words, "I am a receiver, not a seeker." Do not type anything before it or after it, just those words. Because the moment you declare yourself a receiver, you change the signal you are sending into the field, and the field responds to signals, not to wishes. There is a posture of receiving and a posture of requesting, and they are not the same posture, and the field knows the difference between them, the way a bank knows the difference between someone making a withdrawal from their own account and someone standing outside the building hoping someone will hand them money through the glass. Florence Scovel Shinn was specific about this distinction in every teaching she ever gave, and it is the first physical truth that needs to settle in the body before the law can operate at the level of large sums. Stand wherever you are right now. If you are sitting, it is fine. But bring your spine tall. The way someone stands when they are about to receive something they have been told is already theirs. Your hands, place them open in your lap or at your sides, palms facing upward. Not because of ceremony, because the body is a transmitter and the position of the hands is a signal. Palms down is protection. Palms pressed together is petition. Palms open and upward is reception. It is the physical vocabulary of someone who is not asking, but receiving. Every ancient culture that ever understood the movement of wealth and blessing used this position not as metaphor, but as mechanism. You are now in the correct position for what comes next. Breathe in through the nose for a count of 4, hold for a count of 2, release through the mouth for a count of 6. Do this 3 times without rushing. The breath is not background activity. The breath is the vehicle through which the spoken decree travels from intention into the body and from the body into the field around you. Science has confirmed what Florence already knew. The electromagnetic field produced by the human heart extends several feet in every direction, and it broadcasts the frequency of whatever you are feeling most deeply. When you slow your breath, that field stabilizes. When it stabilizes, your decree goes out clear, undistorted, without the static of panic or doubt blurring the signal. Now, speak these words. If you are somewhere you cannot speak aloud, form them deliberately and completely in your mind. But if you can speak, speak, because the spoken word is the instrument Florence described as the most direct line between human consciousness and divine law. Say, What belongs to me by divine right now comes to me. Unexpected, large, and in perfect timing. I am the rightful heir to infinite supply, and the field knows my name. Say it again, this time with slightly more weight behind each word, the way you would sign your name on a document that officially transfers a deed. And then say it one final time with the full, quiet authority of someone who is not asking the universe for permission. Someone who is informing the universe that the claim has been made, the paperwork is signed, and the delivery is confirmed. What you just did is not a ritual in the decorative sense. It is not ceremony for the sake of feeling spiritual. It is a neurological event. When you combine an elevated emotion, the genuine feeling of already being the heir, not the applicant, with a clear spoken declaration, your brain fires the identical neural pathways it would fire if the large sum had physically arrived in your account at that moment. Your subconscious mind does not distinguish between vivid internal experience and external reality. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable. The neural pathways that were just activated are the same ones that will recognize the opportunity, make the connection, say yes to the invitation that leads to the money, and do so automatically because the brain now has a template for what receiving large sums feels like. And it will move your choices and perceptions toward experiences that match that template. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote in The Power of the Spoken Word, published after her death in 1945, compiled from her lectures, that the word you speak over yourself has more legal authority in the spiritual realm than any contract written in ink. That is not poetry. She meant it exactly the way a lawyer means it when they say that certain rights are inalienable. They cannot be negotiated away. They cannot be taken. They can only be abandoned through ignorance or waived through agreement with something lesser. Every time you agreed with the voice that said you were not the kind of person who receives large sums, you were waiving a right. Today, that waiver is rescinded. The declaration you just made is the revocation document. Notice what is present in your body right now. There may be a warmth that starts in the chest and spreads outward. There may be a slight lightness behind the sternum, as though something that was pressing there has shifted even a few millimeters to the side. There may simply be a strange, quiet sense of rightness, not excitement, not euphoria, but something older and steadier. That is recognition. That is the part of you that has always known this is true, finally hearing it confirmed in a language it understands. A man named Rondell, 38 years old, from Memphis, Tennessee, tried every financial technique he had ever come across for 11 years. He worked 2 jobs. He took online courses. He read books. He prayed. He was consistent and sincere and still spent every month 3 weeks away from being behind on his rent. He told me that the moment he made a declaration from a posture of inheritance rather than petition, something in his chest felt different, not dramatically, but definitively, the way a lock sounds different after the right key turns it, even before the door swings open. Within 19 days of that first declaration, he received a call from a former business partner he had not spoken to in 6 years. The partner had sold a project they had co-created together, a small software tool, to a tech company that had integrated it into a product suite. Rondell's share of the licensing settlement came to $22,800. He had not known the tool was ever sold. He had not known he was owed anything. The field knew because the field operates on the law of increase, and the law of increase responds to those who have authorized themselves to receive. Go to the comments now and write, "The claim has been made." Those 4 words are your declaration of receivership. They are your signature on the document. Let them sit there in the public record of this moment. Florence Scovel Shinn was asked once, by a woman sitting in one of her New York lectures sometime in the late 1920s, to define in the simplest possible terms what she meant by the phrase divine right. The woman had money troubles that had lasted so long she could no longer separate her identity from the trouble. Florence looked at her for a moment. There is a version of this story told by students who were present, and said, "Your right to prosperity is not something you earn. It is something you were issued, the way a birth certificate is issued. It precedes your choices, your failures, your debt, your fear, and your doubt. It exists in the original record, and no circumstance in the physical world has the authority to revoke it. What circumstance can do, and what it has done for most people, is make you forget the record exists. That is the full definition. And it changes everything once it is understood not as inspiration, but as law. Because law does not operate based on whether you feel ready. The law of gravity does not wait for you to believe in it before it holds you to the earth. The law of increase, Florence's term for the spiritual principle governing the expansion of supply, does not wait for you to feel worthy before it delivers what belongs to you by the original record. It waits only for one thing: the claim, the filed declaration, the moment you stop petitioning and start receiving. Think about how a DNA test works in a legal inheritance case. Someone dies and leaves a substantial estate. The heir does not know they are the heir. Years pass. The estate sits in a legal holding structure, maintained by trustees, generating interest, waiting. The money does not go away. The money does not get transferred to someone more deserving. It waits because it is registered to a specific recipient, and until that recipient makes the claim, the system has no instruction to release the funds. Now consider that this is not a metaphor Florence stumbled upon. This is the precise architecture she was describing when she wrote about the divine pattern. There is a pattern of perfect provision that pre-exists your life in the physical world. It was established before you were born. It carries your name in the original record, and it has been waiting, accumulating, gaining weight in the invisible, for the moment you understand that you do not need to deserve it. You need to claim it. This is why the prosperity consciousness that Florence taught is categorically different from the abundance mindset language that became popular in modern self-help culture. Mindset implies that you are adjusting your attitude toward something external. Consciousness, in Florence's use of the term, means something deeper. It means the operating frequency at which you identify yourself in relation to supply. Mindset says, I believe money is coming. Consciousness says, I am the heir and the money is already registered in my name. One is hoping, the other is knowing. And the field, the quantum fabric of reality that organizes circumstances, connections, timing, and channel, responds exclusively to knowing, never to hoping. Hoping is a signal that says the thing has not arrived. Knowing is a signal that says the thing has arrived in the invisible and is processing into the visible. Those are two completely different sets of instructions being broadcast into the same field. There is a moment in Florence's book, The Secret Door to Success, published in 1940, where she describes a student who came to her after receiving what she described as the smallest amounts. Never enough. Never what she had called in, always a fraction. Florence's diagnosis was immediate. The woman had the right words, but the wrong frequency. She spoke prosperity, but vibrated petition. She said the decree, but felt the doubt. The field received a mixed signal and delivered a mixed result. Florence's prescription was not more affirmation. It was a single shift at the identity level. To stop seeing herself as someone who needed money and begin seeing herself as someone who had authorized the delivery of what was already hers. Within 3 weeks, the woman received 2 separate, unexpected sums that together covered 6 months of expenses she had been dreading. Here is what that looks like in terms that belong to the present moment. Your financial reality right now is essentially a live stream of the signal you have been broadcasting most consistently. Not the signal of your best day, the signal of your average day, the one that runs in the background while you go through your routines. If that background signal is running a frequency of I am someone who struggles with money, then large sums of money are essentially trying to reach a channel that is tuned to a different station. The signal is out there. The provision is in the field, but you are broadcasting on the frequency of lack, and wealth flows toward the frequency of wealth. This is not punishment. This is physics. Florence called it the law of compensation. What you radiate returns in kind, not in mood, not in effort, in identity frequency. The divine right to large sums is specific, because large sums require a stronger, cleaner, more sustained signal than small sums. A small trickle of money can squeeze through even a partially blocked channel. A large sum requires an open, authorized, clean channel. The ritual you completed, the open palms, the steady breath, the declaration spoken 3 times with increasing authority, that was the beginning of the channel opening. It was not the completion. The completion happens over the hours that follow, as the new frequency stabilizes in the body and the field begins to reorganize circumstances accordingly. Write in the comments right now. My channel is open. I receive large sums. Say it as a statement of current reality, not a wish for future reality. The difference in those two things is the entire teaching of Florence Scovel Shinn compressed into a single choice of tense. And then keep watching, because what comes next addresses the reasons so many people who understand this law still do not receive at the volume they have claimed. And that reason is something almost no one names directly. Here is the question that matters most right now, and it deserves a completely honest answer. When you made your declaration, when you said the words, felt the shift, opened the palms, were you speaking as someone who was claiming what is theirs? Or were you speaking as someone who was hoping the words might work? The answer to that question is the single greatest determinant of how quickly large sums arrive. Florence Scovel Shinn identified this as the difference between petition and decree, and she was uncompromising about it in every class she taught in New York during the 1920s and 30s. She would tell her students directly, if you are asking, you are in the wrong position. If you are declaring, you are in alignment with the law. Asking presupposes that the answer might be no. Declaring presupposes that the answer has already been given and you are confirming its receipt. This distinction is not semantic, it is structural. When you ask for money, you position yourself as an outsider to the system of supply, someone petitioning an authority that is separate from you and that has the discretion to grant or deny. When you declare your divine right to large sums, you position yourself as an insider, as someone operating within a system whose rules you understand and whose authority you share. Florence was not gentle about this point. She said repeatedly that God, or what she called infinite intelligence, does not respond to begging. Infinite intelligence responds to authorized commands, issued by someone who has stepped into the identity of heir rather than the identity of applicant. Think about what happens when a package is being delivered and the carrier arrives at the wrong address. The package does not disappear. It goes back into the system. It sits in a holding facility. It waits for a correct address to be confirmed. Your large sum is in the system. It has been in the system. But if your internal address, your identity frequency, is registered as someone who survives rather than someone who thrives, someone who manages rather than someone who receives abundance, then the delivery cannot complete. The package goes back to the holding facility. The law of increase keeps adding to it, but you do not receive it until the address updates. The update is not a one-time event. It is a recalibration of identity that happens in layers, which is why the results from this kind of work often arrive in a pattern that feels almost staged. A small arrival, then a medium one, then something that makes you sit down because the number is larger than you had been trained to expect. This is the field testing the new frequency, confirming the address, increasing the volume of delivery in proportion to the strength and consistency of the new signal. Darlene, the woman outside Columbus, received her $9,147, not because she had the perfect practice, but because she had been consistent enough, for long enough, at the new frequency, for the field to confirm her address and complete the delivery of what had been waiting in the holding structure. A man named Clifton, 51 years old, from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, had spent 30 years as an electrician. He earned a respectable income and lost it with equal regularity. Medical bills, a divorce, a business partnership that ended badly, a truck that needed more repairs than it was worth. He described his relationship with money as a door that never quite latched. Everything that came in found a way back out before he could save it. Clifton was not someone who used spiritual language naturally. He was skeptical of anything that sounded like it belonged in a Sunday morning television program. But a woman he worked with gave him a copy of Florence Scovel Shinn's Your Word is Your Wand, published in 1928, and he read it in 2 sittings because something in the prose kept him from putting it down. He said later that the specific passage that changed him was the one where Florence writes that the man who knows his divine right stands in a place no adversity can reach. Clifton did not understand it immediately. He sat with it for several days. Then, on a morning when he was driving to a job site at 5:47 in the morning, it landed, and he said it landed physically in the chest, like something clicking into place after years of being slightly misaligned. Clifton began speaking his decree every morning on the drive to work, not with emotional intensity, with what he described as a plain certainty, the way he would describe the specifications of a circuit he was wiring. Factual, accurate, not hopeful. The next month, he received a letter from a union dispute board he had filed a complaint with 4 years earlier and completely abandoned. The complaint had been upheld. The back pay settlement, plus interest calculated over the 4-year period, came to $31,420. The check arrived certified mail on a Thursday. Clifton said he did not cry. He sat very still for a long time. Then he said out loud, to no one in the room, the address was right. And it was. The prosperity consciousness that produces large sums is not a mood you can manufacture on your best day. It is a frequency you build through consistent identification with the heir rather than the applicant. And the most direct path to that frequency, the tool Florence returned to again and again in every book, every lecture, every private session she conducted, is the spoken decree, delivered with authority, from a place of knowing rather than hoping. Your word is your wand. Not because it is magical in the theatrical sense, because it is the mechanism through which identity broadcasts its frequency into the field. Every word you have spoken about money, about yourself in relation to money, about what is possible for you financially, every one of those words has been a broadcast. Today you are changing the station. The people who move into large sum receiving most quickly are not the ones with the most spiritual knowledge. They are the ones who make the identity shift most completely, who stop visiting the wealthy state on good days and start living there as their permanent address. Write in the comments, this is my permanent address. Abundant, authorized, receiving. Let that be the declaration that anchors today. There is a law inside the law of divine right that Florence Scovel Shinn considered essential to understanding why large sums behave the way they do. And it is the law of circulation. The principle that money is not a static object, but a living current, and that currents require movement to remain healthy and to grow in volume. Florence wrote about this in terms that still feel radical by modern financial standards. The person who hoards money out of fear builds a dam, and a dam does not increase the river. It kills it. The person who circulates money with trust and gratitude builds a channel, and a wide channel is what allows large volumes to pass through. This is not advice to spend recklessly. Florence was precise and practical in everything she taught. What she was describing is the energetic relationship between giving and receiving. Specifically, the quality of energy with which money leaves your hands and the signal that quality sends into the field. When you pay a bill with resentment, the signal you broadcast is scarcity. There goes what I had. Now I am less. When you pay the same bill with the consciousness of an heir, The signal is entirely different. I release this gladly because I know the source is unlimited and the channel stays open when the water moves. The field receives two entirely different instructions from what appears to be the same action. One instruction reinforces the dam. The other widens the channel. A woman named Yolanda, 47 years old from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, had a specific relationship with her utility bills that she described as dread. Every month, when those envelopes arrived, her stomach would tighten. She would delay opening them. She would set them on the corner of the counter and walk past them for 2 or 3 days before finally sitting down with a sick feeling to open them and begin the mental calculation of what could wait and what could not. This ritual of avoidance was so consistent and so physically specific that she could feel the anxiety in her shoulders before she even checked the mail. What she did not realize, what Florence would have recognized immediately, is that the dread was a decree. Every month, the act of approaching her bills with that specific quality of fear was a broadcast into the field that said, money is danger. Money leaving is loss. There is not enough. The field received this broadcast faithfully and returned in kind, enough to manage, never enough to rest. Yolanda began as an experiment to approach the same bills with the spoken declaration that precedes every payment. This flows from an unlimited source. I release it gladly. The channel stays open. I receive more than I release. It felt absurd to her for the first 3 weeks. She said she felt like she was performing a scene from a play she did not fully believe in. But she kept doing it because the alternative was the dread, and the dread was exhausting in a way the absurdity was not. At the end of the second month, something started shifting. Not dramatically, not with fireworks, but in the way the tightening in her shoulders became less automatic when she approached the counter. By the 4th month, a former employer contacted her about a consulting opportunity. The project ran for 6 months. The total income from that single project was $44,200, more than she had ever earned in a single year at any previous job. She told me the most striking thing was that she had not applied for the consulting work, had not networked for it, had not hustled for it in any conventional sense. She had simply changed what money felt like when it left her hands, and the field changed what it sent back. The second principle inside the law of circulation that applies specifically to large sums is this. Large sums require non-resistance, and non-resistance is not the same as indifference. Florence was careful to define non-resistance as an active choice, not the absence of care, but the absence of fighting. When you fight against your debt, when you hate your bank balance, when you argue mentally with every number that feels smaller than it should be, you are pouring enormous amounts of energy into the very thing you want to dissolve. What you resist, you empower. What you release from your grip, not in defeat, not in resignation, but in the conscious choice of an heir who knows the inheritance exceeds the current circumstances, you deprive of its power to define you. Florence called this releasing the rope in the tug of war. The moment you stop pulling, the tension goes out of the entire system, and in that release, the channel opens. There is a sensation that comes when a person genuinely shifts from resistance to release around money. It does not feel like giving up. It feels like putting down something very heavy that you did not realize you had been carrying. The shoulders drop slightly. The breath comes a little easier. There is a quality of spaciousness in the chest that was not there before. This is the physical signature of the channel opening. Not just the energetic channel that Florence described, but the biological channel, the nervous system moving out of threat response and into receptivity, the parts of the brain responsible for creativity and pattern recognition coming back online, the heart's electromagnetic field stabilizing into the frequency of someone who is not fighting for survival, but living in provision. In that state, opportunities become visible that were invisible when the nervous system was in lockdown. Connections become possible that were impossible when every interaction was filtered through the scarcity lens. The large sum does not appear from nowhere. It appears from the directions that were always there, now finally visible because the filter has been removed. Write in the comments now, "I release the rope. The channel is wide open." Say it and mean the release it describes. Not the release of effort, not the release of responsibility, the release of the fighting that has been draining the energy that belongs in the channel. 48 hours is a specific and sacred window, and Florence Scovel Shinn understood its significance not as a superstition, but as a law of spiritual timing that she observed again and again across hundreds of students over decades. The reason 48 hours matters, particularly after a declaration as significant as the one made today, is that the subconscious mind and the energetic field around the body operate on a cycle of approximately 2 days when a new identity frequency has been introduced. Think of it like a wire transfer that has been initiated. In the first 24 hours, the transaction is in processing. The order has been given. The old account has been debited. But the new account has not yet been credited. If you check in the first 24 hours and see nothing, that absence of a visible balance is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that the transaction is in motion. The worst possible action you can take in this window is to interpret the processing stage as proof that it is not working and withdraw the instruction. That cancels the transfer. You are back at the beginning. The first 24 hours after a declaration of divine right and large sum receivership are a testing period. Not a test designed by some external force to see if you are worthy, but a natural period in which the old operating system makes one final attempt to reassert itself. This is biological, not supernatural. The neural pathways associated with the old identity frequency are well established. They are like a highway that traffic has traveled for years. The new pathways are freshly paved. The brain, which is efficient by design, will attempt to route back to the familiar highway unless the new route is reinforced. This is why the decree must be spoken, or at minimum felt with full commitment, multiple times within the first 24 hours, not with desperation, with the steady repetition of someone reading the tracking number on a package they know is in transit. What you are likely to notice in the first 24 hours is a specific kind of quiet that feels unusual. Not silence, but a kind of suspended quality to the air around your financial life, as though the usual static of anxiety has dropped a few decibels. Some people describe it as a strange calm that feels too peaceful to trust. Trust it anyway. That calm is the electromagnetic field stabilizing around the new frequency. The heart's signal is broadcasting at a steadier rate. The nervous system has shifted partially out of threat mode. The brain is beginning, at the neurological level, to run the new patterns in parallel with the old ones. This is exactly the condition in which opportunities become perceptible. The small signals, the casual mentions, the coincidences that are not coincidences, the door that opens 1 inch further than usual. In the second 24 hours, the period between the 24th and 48th hour after the declaration, the confirmation signals typically become louder. Not always in the form of money, and this is crucial to understand. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote extensively about what she called the forerunner, the signal that precedes the delivery, the way a text message arrives before the package, the way a phone rings before the voice is heard. A conversation about an amount of money that is meaningful to you, appearing with no apparent context. A number that repeats itself in unrelated places, on a receipt, on a page, on a street sign, in a timestamp on a message. A person from your past contacting you with no evident reason, only for that contact to become relevant within days or weeks. A physical sensation of expansion in the chest when you think about money, where there was previously only contraction. The DNA metaphor applies here in a specific way. When a genetic test confirms an inheritance claim, There is a period between the submission of the test and the confirmation of the results. During that period, the inheritance does not increase or decrease. It simply waits for confirmation. The 48-hour window is your confirmation period. The inheritance has already been submitted. The test is running. And the result has been determined by the original record, not by anything that happens during the processing window. What you do during these 48 hours, specifically whether you hold the frequency of air or collapse back into applicant, determines whether the confirmation is received by the right address. Those who follow the deeper practice within the Patreon circle linked in the description report consistently that the most powerful thing they do within the 48-hour window is to carry the declaration physically into ordinary activities, speaking it internally while making coffee, while commuting, while waiting in any kind of line, while doing any task that does not require full verbal attention, not as repetition for the sake of volume, but as a method of coding the hours with the frequency, so that no gap opens for the old signal to reassert itself. The declaration becomes the atmospheric condition of the entire window, rather than a single event within it. Write in the comments, 48 hours. The transfer is in motion. I hold the address steady. Let this be your commitment to the window, not as a performance, but as a maintenance of the signal that is already broadcasting the right frequency into the field. There is something that Florence Scovel Shinn admitted, not often, but in certain moments of particular honesty within her lectures, that almost no teacher of prosperity says out loud. She had experienced every one of the resistances she warned her students about. She had felt the doubt in the middle of her own declarations. She had gone through periods where the law felt theoretical and her circumstances felt more real than anything she had ever taught. She shared this not to undermine the teaching, but to make it clear that resistance is not a sign of spiritual failure. It is a sign of spiritual transition. The old frequency does not give up its place quietly. It argues. It presents evidence. It calls witnesses. And if you know its tactics in advance, you can recognize them for what they are, the death sounds of a pattern that is being replaced, rather than mistaking them for truth. The first resistance is the most common and the most seductive, the belief, carried deep in the bones from years of experience, that large sums come only through large effort. This belief is not conscious in most people. It runs below the surface, the way foundational software runs below the interface you can see. On the surface, you believe you deserve abundance. Below, there is a line of code that says, money of significant size requires proportional suffering to precede it. When this belief is active, the subconscious will quietly sabotage any channel that feels like it is producing abundance without adequate struggle, because the old code interprets that as an error, an impossibility, something that cannot be real. The decree of divine right is the direct override of this code. Large sums come by right, not by suffering. The right was issued before the struggle began. The second resistance is more subtle and more dangerous because it wears the costume of humility. It is the feeling, dressed up as virtue, that it would be wrong or arrogant to claim something as significant as large sums. That the appropriate spiritual posture is gratitude for whatever comes rather than authorization of specific volume. Florence addressed this directly in her teaching on what she called the fourth dimensional life, a life lived from the pattern rather than the appearance. She said that settling for less than the original record shows, out of what masquerades as humility, is not humility. It is agreement with a lesser version of reality. True spiritual practice, in Florence's framework, is claiming the full pattern, not negotiating it downward out of misplaced modesty. The third resistance shows up as a re-emergence of old memories, moments when you expected a financial breakthrough and it did not come, moments when you believed and things got worse. The mind stores these as evidence for the prosecution, files that it retrieves to argue that hope is dangerous and expectation leads to disappointment. When these memories surface during the 48-hour window or at any point within this practice, The instruction is simple. Do not debate them. Debate strengthens them. Simply acknowledge the memory and return to the knowing. You are not denying what happened before. You are choosing what happens now. A woman named Solange, 34 years old, from Atlanta, Georgia, described this third resistance in exact terms. She said that every time she tried to believe in a large financial shift, her mind would immediately show her the image of a specific morning, a Tuesday in February, 3 years earlier, when she had been convinced money was coming, had told 2 people about it, and then waited through a day that produced nothing except the embarrassment of having spoken prematurely. That Tuesday had become, without her realizing it, the subconscious argument against every subsequent declaration. Each time she tried to claim divine right, the mind whispered, "Remember that Tuesday." Florence would have said, "The Tuesday proves you were declaring with hope. Today you are declaring with knowing. Those are different instruments. They do not produce the same result." The fourth resistance is comparison. The moment when someone in your peripheral vision appears to receive something significant, and the mind uses their receiving as evidence of your exclusion. Florence was blunt about this. There is no competition in divine supply. The infinite is not running low because someone else received. Their large sum arriving is proof of the law in motion, proof that the channel is active, that the field delivers, that the system works. The correct response to witnessing someone else's abundance is to use it as confirmation that yours is in processing, not as evidence that yours was redirected. Celebrate what you see in others. Declare it as a sign, and the field will register your response as one that belongs to someone who lives inside abundance rather than someone who watches it from outside. The fifth resistance is the arrival of a circumstance, usually around the 36th hour, that appears designed specifically to contradict everything that was declared. An unexpected expense, a message that brings bad news, a situation that the fearful mind will immediately interpret as proof that the declaration did not work. Florence called this the last argument of the old pattern. She compared it to how a bad storm often reaches its peak just before the weather breaks. The appearance is the old reality, making its loudest statement before it yields. The instruction is to respond to the circumstance practically and calmly, without allowing it to revoke the declaration. Handle what needs handling. Do not interpret the storm as a sign that the sun has been permanently canceled. Write in the comments, "I recognize the resistance. It does not stop the delivery. The claim stands." Saying this publicly is itself an act of non-resistance. You are refusing to let the old pattern reclaim its position in silence. The field responds to what is declared in the open. Florence Scovel Shinn spent a significant portion of her work on what she called signs and confirmations, the specific category of experience that functions as the field's communication to the air that the delivery is in process. She was not speaking about wishful pattern matching or the kind of seeing what you want to see that happens when someone is desperate for any evidence that something is working. She was describing a specific quality of signal, unmistakable in its precision, repeating in its nature, and often arriving in the form of something that could not logically be connected to the thing you have declared, yet is unmistakably connected at the level of frequency and content. The first category of signal is what Florence called the forerunner, a small arrival that precedes a large one, not as the main event, but as the announcement. A $10 bill found in a coat pocket that had not been worn in months. A refund from a company you had forgotten you were owed one from. A parking ticket that gets dismissed without explanation. The ego dismisses these as too small to matter. The air recognizes them as confirmation that the channel is open and flowing, that the current has been activated and small water is moving first, the way a pipe runs air and then begins to run water when the flow is restored after a long closure. The correct response to every forerunner is gratitude delivered with authority. This is the first wave. I receive it fully. More follows in greater volume. The second category is the appearance of the connector, a person who enters your field unexpectedly and creates a link to the large sum you have declared. This person rarely arrives announcing themselves as the connector. They appear as a casual encounter, a reconnection, a referral, a name mentioned in passing by someone else. Florence documented case after case of students who received large sums that passed through a person they had thought about or mentioned in the days following their declaration. This is not coincidence in the conventional sense. This is the field reorganizing interpersonal connections in response to the frequency that has been broadcast. The large sum does not materialize from thin air. It travels through channels that already exist, channels made of people, relationships, debts owed, royalties uncollected, opportunities unmatched until the right frequency activated the connection. The third category of signal is what Florence called inner knowing, a specific quality of confidence that arises without any external justification, a sense of certainty about a decision that the logical mind cannot fully explain. An absence of the usual anxiety when thinking about money that is so complete it almost feels suspicious. A quality of ease in the body when imagining the large sum arriving that is distinct from the forced ease of someone trying to feel positive. This inner knowing is the body confirming that the frequency match has been made, that the address is now correctly coded, that the delivery system has confirmed the recipient, and that the processing has moved into its final stage. Now the revelation that has been waiting through everything said so far, the element that explains why people who know about divine right, who practice prosperity consciousness, who speak Florence Scovel Shinn's words faithfully, why some of them still do not receive large sums. The answer is this: there is a decree that was made before the current one, and it is still active. It was not made consciously. It was not made with any intention of limiting you. It was made in a moment of pain, or of witnessing someone else's pain, or of hearing a repeating message from a trusted voice, or of experiencing a specific kind of disappointment that the mind interpreted as a conclusion about money and what money does and does not do for people like you. That moment became a decree, and the field registered it with the same authority it registers the words you speak now. The old decree is running in parallel with the new one, sending a mixed signal, and the field, which is precise and not sympathetic, delivers a mixed result. The ritual completed earlier, the open palms, the steady breath, the three-level declaration, is specifically designed to begin overriding the old decree. But overriding is a process, not an event. The new decree gains strength through repetition, through consistency, through the accumulation of hours and days in which the new identity frequency is sustained. Each time the new decree is spoken or fully felt, it lays another layer of code over the old one. The old code weakens, the signal clarifies, the delivery completes. This is not a reason for discouragement. It is the mechanism of transformation described precisely, so that you can work with it consciously rather than wonder why results seem partial or delayed. You are not waiting for the field to decide to respond. You are watching an overwrite in progress, and the overwrite has already begun. A man named Kwame, 55 years old from Charlotte, North Carolina, had grown up in a household where money was something that arrived with tremendous effort and left without ceremony. His father had told him, not unkindly, that people like them had to work twice as hard for half as much. And his father had not been wrong about his own experience. But that statement, absorbed at age 9, became an operating instruction for the field. Kwame worked 2 careers simultaneously for most of his adult life. He was talented, respected, and perpetually exhausted. He never understood why large opportunities always seemed to arrive at the wrong time, or collapse just before completion, or pay less than the initial agreement. It was the old decree in conflict with the new one, the 9-year-old's field running a command that no adult-level declaration had yet overwritten completely. When Kwame understood this, when he identified the original moment of the old decree and consciously revoked it, the overwrite accelerated. Within 6 weeks, a licensing deal he had been negotiating for 2 years, which had stalled multiple times, suddenly completed at a figure significantly above what had been discussed. The final payment was $67,000, delivered in a single transfer. The deal had not changed. The people involved had not changed. The frequency of the recipient had changed. Write in the comments, "The old decree is revoked. The new record stands. I am the rightful heir, and the delivery is completing now." 3 weeks before Bethany received the largest single sum of money that had ever entered her life, she was sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store in Raleigh, North Carolina, at 6:14 in the evening, eating a granola bar she had brought from home because she had calculated, with the precision that comes from years of financial tightness, that spending $4 on coffee inside the store was an expenditure she could not comfortably absorb that week. She was 41 years old. She had a master's degree. She had worked for the same nonprofit for 11 years, believed deeply in what the organization did, and had accepted for over a decade the quiet diminishment that came with being chronically underpaid in a field that depended on the labor of people willing to be underpaid because they cared about the mission. She was not miserable, but she was exhausted in the specific way that comes from never having enough space, not enough financial space, not enough breathing room, not enough cushion between herself and the next crisis. She had found Florence Scovel Shinn's work 6 months earlier, recommended by a woman in a reading group who spoke about it so quietly and with such personal conviction that Bethany bought a copy of The Game of Life and How to Play It on the way home from the meeting. She read it slowly, rereading passages, skeptical but engaged. She began speaking declarations, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but in the car on her commute and in the kitchen while she made her lunch. She noticed small things changing. Her mood in relation to money shifted slightly. She stopped waking up at 3 in the morning doing involuntary calculations. She started feeling, in a way she could not quite explain, that something was in transit. Then came the 3rd week, and the evening in the parking lot, and a call from her older sister that began with the words, "I need to tell you something that came through from the estate attorney." Their mother had passed 2 years earlier and left an estate that was, by all appearances, modest. A small house, some savings, nothing that Bethany had calculated as significant. What the estate attorney had finally tracked down, after 2 years of diligence that no one had known was ongoing, was a life insurance policy from a union her father had belonged to 30 years before his death. A policy that named their mother as beneficiary and that had passed, by the terms of the will, equally to the 3 daughters. Bethany's share, including the interest that had accumulated while the policy was being tracked, was $48,312. She sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes after her sister told her the number. She did not cry immediately. She felt, she said later, an enormous and very quiet rightness, as though something that had been waiting in the invisible had simply moved into the visible, exactly the way Florence described it. The money had not come from nowhere. It had come from an original record, a document signed before she was born, by people who loved her, that had been waiting in a holding structure for the confirmation of her address. She had spent 6 months updating the address, the delivery completed. What Bethany says when she tells this story is not that she manifested the money. She says she stopped blocking the delivery. There is a precision in that distinction that Florence Scovel Shinn would recognize immediately. The money was always coming. The right was always established. The estate attorney was always going to find the policy. The only variable was whether Bethany's frequency would be coded correctly when the confirmation arrived. The 6 months of quiet declaration, the small shifts, the gradual release of the financial dread she had carried for years, all of it was not creating the inheritance. It was preparing the address so the inheritance could complete the delivery. The law of divine right and large sums is not the law of attraction repackaged. The law of attraction, as commonly taught, implies that you are pulling something toward you from a distance. What Florence described is different in its architecture. The supply is not at a distance. It is in the invisible record, registered to you, processed and ready. The only movement required is the movement of your identity. From the person who does not know they are the heir to the person who does. From petition to declaration. From hoping to knowing. From the parking lot eating a granola bar to the moment you hear the number and feel, instead of shock, the quiet confirmation of something that was always true. Everything described in this video, the posture of receivership, the spoken decree, the law of circulation, the 48-hour window, the recognition and disarmament of resistances, the reading of signs, the understanding of the old decree and its revocation. All of it is the path between those two moments. Florence Scovel Shinn spent her career documenting that path because she walked it herself and watched hundreds of others walk it, and the consistency of the result. Large sums arriving by right rather than by effort, through unexpected channels, at amounts that exceeded what the rational mind had calculated as possible, convinced her that this was not an exception available to spiritually exceptional people. It was a law available to anyone willing to claim the original record and hold the address steady until the delivery completed. Write in the comments, "Bethany's story is also mine. The delivery is completing. The address is confirmed." Declare it as present tense reality, because in the original record it is. The supply is already moving. This is not a statement of hope. This is the declaration that Florence Scovel Shinn called the sealing word. The declaration that does not ask the law to begin operating, but acknowledges that the law is already in motion, has been in motion from the moment the original record was established, and has been waiting only for this moment of recognition to complete its delivery into the visible world. Everything you have received in this video, the understanding of divine right as a registered inheritance rather than a reward to be earned, the ritual of open palms and three-level decree, the law of the divine pattern as Florence articulated it, the mechanics of the 48-hour window and what to do and what not to do within it, the recognition of the 7 resistances as the dying arguments of a pattern that is being replaced, the reading of signs in their 3 categories, and the revelation of the old decree and how its revocation accelerates the delivery. All of it is one teaching delivered from a single axis. The axis is this: you are the heir. You have always been the heir. The only thing that was ever between you and large sums arriving with regularity and with the ease that belongs to someone living from their original record was the failure to know this, and now you know it. The DNA metaphor that has run through this entire teaching reaches its completion here. When a genetic test confirms inheritance, there is a moment when the confirmation arrives and everything that was uncertain becomes certain. The uncertainty was never in the inheritance itself. The inheritance was always there. The uncertainty was in the knowledge of it, in the claim. You have made the claim today. The confirmation has been submitted, and the original record, established before your name, before your story, before any of the financial experiences that trained you to expect less than what the record shows, that original record has not changed by one word because of anything you went through before this moment. The inheritance is intact. The amount is the full amount. It has not been reduced by your doubt, diminished by your debt, or revoked by your difficulty. It has been waiting, accumulating, gaining weight in the invisible for exactly this moment of recognition. Florence Scovel Shinn, who illustrated children's books in New York before the turn of the 20th century, who navigated a major personal transition in 1912, who self-published the book that would eventually reach millions of people in 1925, who lectured and counseled and documented for decades until her death, left one teaching that underlies every other teaching she ever gave. It can be compressed into a single sentence, and it is this: the word is the deed, and the deed has already been signed. Your spoken declaration of divine right is not the beginning of a process. It is the registration of a claim in a system that has been holding the asset in escrow since before you knew the claim existed. The process begins in the invisible and ends in the visible. You are not waiting for it to start. You are watching it complete. Speak this now wherever you are, in whatever voice carries the most authority for you at this moment. What belongs to me by divine right now comes to me. Large, specific, unexpected, and in perfect timing. The old decree is revoked. The new record is standing. The delivery is completing. The supply is already moving, and it cannot be otherwise. If you are ready to take this practice deeper, to receive daily decrees, advanced rituals, and the full methodology of what Florence called active preparation for the arrival of large sums, the Patreon is linked in the description of this video and in the first pinned comment. What is, there is not more content. It is the continuation of this specific work, shared daily within a circle of people who are actively holding the frequency of air and reporting the results with the kind of specificity, exact numbers, exact timing, exact channels that confirms the law in motion. The link is there because you are ready for it, not because you need to be told to use it. And air does not need to be persuaded to collect what is already theirs. Subscribe to this channel because the work continues. Every video is another layer of the same law, another angle of light on the same truth, another documented confirmation that Florence Scovel Shinn was not writing inspiration. She was writing the operating manual for a law that governs the movement of large sums from the invisible supply into the visible lives of those who know their original record. Write in the comments, as your final declaration in this space today, the supply is already moving. My name is in the original record. I receive large sums by divine right, and it cannot be otherwise. The delivery is completing, the address is confirmed, the supply is already moving.